are we looking for a king in our lives? And I think the answer is yes. I think that's a natural human tendency to look for that external factor, internal factor in our lives, whether it be from a political standpoint, whether it be from a personal standpoint, looking to yourself in the discipline component or your job or money or people. Um, None of those, I think, in and of themselves are inherently wrong. But what I think Rick and I are just trying to convey, and hopefully we did a good job of this, is um, keeping Christ as king in your life, and allowing decisions and actions to flow from that. And I believe when we do that, when we keep Christ as king in our lives, that's going to allow us to really follow that path, that perfect plan that God has for us, and gives us an opportunity to partner with him and allow Christ to move through us and in us to accomplish his purpose.
Who's your king? Like, who's in charge? Who's the one you turn to for security, for protection? Who's the one that you look to provide the joy in your life? And maybe it's not a who, maybe it's a thing. The pleasures of this world sometimes take us and to a place of happiness or joy that's fleeting. But ultimately, we all long for a king, for something to guide us, drive us, and protect us, and bring us to some sense of pleasure or normalcy in our lives, which is what we all seem to long for. And some of those could be good, and some of those could be destructive. But it seems we're always looking for a king.
Yep. So today we're going to talk about the birth of Jesus, and something that I've just been reading through leading up to Christmas. And one of the things that sticks out to me is just this idea of a 400-year period that the Israelites, the Jews, went from hearing from God to the birth of Jesus. And so when that announcement was made and when Jesus was born, I think in many ways the minds of the people were looking for an earthly king in Christ, and he was so much more. So that's what we want to dive in today. This is Michael and Rick here at the Endure Training Center. Thanks for joining us. Our mission here is to help you guys and encourage you to find and fulfill your purpose by developing a Christ-centered approach to faith, fellowship, and fortitude. So, Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be with you, Michael.
Can you just talk us through a little bit of that history? I know you shared a really great message over Christmas, and something that we've been working through in our church as well. But give us a little bit of context here, and maybe a scene setter, so that we can have a greater appreciation for what life was like and what the people were looking for with the birth of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So you look through the Old Testament for thousands of years, we have prophets coming to tell us about God, speaking to us on behalf of God, and to the people, I should say. And so they experience this for many years, and God takes them through a roadmap of where they turn to God, and he helps them and forgives them and sets them in relationship to him, and then they turn away from God, and God prompts them, and he tries to draw them back with his love, and tries to encourage them to come back to him. And in some cases he has to take them through some pretty difficult circumstances to get them to turn back to God, like a lot of us when things are going well, and we find comfort and pleasure in the things of this world. We forget about God, and then God reminds us that he's there and that he's the ultimate king of our lives. And he wants to be the ultimate one to guide and protect and give us contentment and peace. So he does things to draw us back to him. So we have this whole period of thousands of years where that takes place. And finally, God just goes silent. And Micah comes on scene. He speaks, and then all of a sudden, God's just quiet. And could you imagine the people over years? And it's interesting because it's over generations and generations of people. So it just speaks to the importance of how the people had to share what God had communicated with them over generations, because he had stopped communicating with them. So after 400 years, we see God come on the scene through the angel Gabriel. He comes to a young girl who is a virgin, never been with a man. And he speaks to her, and she's, man, could you imagine? She has to be frightened. Here's this thing, and it's telling her all these things are going to happen. She's like, I don't understand this. How can this happen? And he says, well, with man, things are impossible, but with God, all things, these things can happen, and the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit will come upon you. And it's just amazing, right? The story. And then there's all the other characters that comes into play, and we see Jesus come to be our King and to lead and guide us. So yeah, pretty
Yeah.
amazing story.
Yeah, so when I was reading through Luke 2, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, something that stuck out to me. So Jesus is born, and then his Mary and Joseph take him to the temple, and so you have Simeon there, and then you also have Anna, the prophetess, right? And so she's been waiting for a long time. I think it says advanced in years, having lived was 84. It says,
Mm.
and then was a widow until she was 84. And I was reading through some commentary whether that meant she was a widow for 84 years or she was 84 years old. But let's just say it was a long time. She's old, right? And it said here in Luke 2, verse 38, and it says, and coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. And so I read that, and that's where it kind of just this idea of, are we looking for a king? Where you think about, like you just laid out, 400 years, haven't heard from God. All these things start in motion. Christ the Messiah is born. And then this lady here, the prophetess Anna, is waiting for a long time in anticipation of seeing Christ. And that's what it says. Then she begins to tell all who were willing to listen, and all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. And so when I put myself in these people's place, again, I think in their minds and in the way that they're able to comprehend, they're thinking, living under Roman oppression, brutal oppression in many ways. And then you kind of go back through the history of the Jews, and it's this like up and down, I think starting with Saul, really, when they said, hey, all right, we want a king. We want a physical king. We want this guy who looks the part, who acts the part, who's able to protect us, who's able to, rally the army and the troops. And they just go like up and down and up and down, and good kings and bad kings. But I think one of the common themes along that process is, yeah, somebody that's able to really to physically provide for them. And so in many ways, I think that's what the people were looking for, and probably even maybe subconsciously in their mind when they think about the birth of Christ.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? I believe that all of them were excited about a coming Messiah, right? A coming king.
Mm-hmm.
But they all had their own individual idea of what that would be and what
Yeah.
that would produce in their lives, right? And I don't think that's any different than us today. People
Mm-hmm.
come to know Jesus, and they hear the gospel, and they pray to receive Christ, and they have an expectation of what that's going to mean and do in their life. Some of them, it's going to take away all my trouble, and we know that's not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It's do this. It's going, I'm going to have prosperity, and we know that's not true. And but there's all these concepts, so it's interesting because it's no different than the Old Testament. I want to read something to you. It's from 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5, 6, and 7. Check this out. It says, verse 4, it says, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And it says, and said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.
Mm.
We want a king like all those other nations, right? Watch this. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said it. Give us a king to judge us. It displeased him. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me,
Me.
that I should not reign over them.
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? So the people are going, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And what we don't get from that story is this: God had already told them throughout all the history prior to that, I will be your
Your king.
king. And it's crazy because they didn't want that.
Yeah.
They wanted a king like all the other people of the world. So they're like, hey, bro, appreciate it, but we don't want what you got. We
Yeah.
want what the world has.
Yeah.
And that's what we find right here in the story of Jesus. He comes to bring peace between man and God, not peace between men on earth, but peace between man and
Man.
God.
Yeah.
And he comes to provide salvation. And they're like, no, bro, that ain't what we want. We want somebody to kick the Roman
Deliverance.
heel and
Yeah.
get the depression off of us.
Hmm.
It still happens today. We don't
Yeah.
want the things of God. We don't want the ways of God. We want God to work the things of this world to our advantage.
Yeah.
And there we sit.
Yeah. And so that's really, why I thought this would be a good conversation to have. I mean, just as much for me and you as anyone listening.
That's right.
But I think for me, as I've been working through the Old Testament, little by little, a chapter a day, really just trying to absorb it and take it in. Um, yeah, you read this stuff and it's like, man, we're really no different. Like history always repeats itself. And obviously the goal is to learn. And I think maybe one difference that we have is the ability to have personal relationship with Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit in us.
That's
Which
right.
should be an advantage, and it's not always. But and so that's one thing my wife and I talk about, like trying to remember reading through a lot of this, is that that's one component that they didn't have that we do have. But yeah, you see this and you're like, man, like it plays out time and time again in our own lives. And so one funny example that I could think of recently, of like where I think the idea of where God's trying to tell them something or show them something or show us something, and we just like it just goes right over our head, is that so I live in a small town in the Midwest, and I've been on the hunt for some really good Wagyu beef, a brisket. Had prime grade before, which was good, and but I wanted to try step up the game a little bit. And so for like the last year, my wife's been telling me like, oh yeah, this place right off the highway has Wagyu beef, and I drive by it all the time, and it's got landscaping rocks. It's got some skeleton looking guy riding a buffalo on a pallet out there. And it's like this big metal shed building, and every time I'm like, no, like that's impossible. I don't know how this place would sell this kind of high quality meat. And so she would tell me probably a handful of times. I'm like, yeah, like I heard it, but I didn't, I didn't believe it. I'm like, yeah, I don't believe it. So finally, just recently, she told me like, hey, in the newspaper, yeah, we read the newspaper here still. It has an ad, like they're having a sale. Go look and see if they have it. So finally, me and my son went in there, and sure enough, man, I walked through the store, like it's like a little store, and then you walk into the back room, and just like two walk-in freezers just full of beef, Wagyu beef. And so I thought about that. I'm like, man, that's kind of the way sometimes I think we are with God, right? Like he's trying to tell us something plain as day, and we just like can't comprehend it, and we just totally miss what he's trying to tell us.
Yeah. Man, that's amazing. It is true. But yeah, it's and you see it so many times over and over again in the scriptures, where God's like, look, hey, right here, right here, right.
Right here.
And then to some degree, he's finally like, okay, I'll just let you. Two things come to my mind when you was telling that story. Number one, man, he refers to us as sheep.
Yeah.
How true is that, man? We're just like sheep, man. We
Yeah.
just one sheep's heading that way. We just like, and we just keep following each other. And you see destruction. I think I like smoking. Like, how many people smoke? It's like, man, do you not see all the people dying and the quality of life they have from like stop?
Hmm.
We just keep going,
Yeah.
like it's gonna be different.
Can you
And
do
God,
that again?
hey, hey, I got
Yeah.
better than prime over here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. And then the second thing I thought of is Alicia. She's like trying to tell you, hey, bro, hey,
Yeah.
and it made me think. And I forget the story, but there was a guy who dissed David during his time, and of course his wife's like, nah, bro, you can't diss David. He's going to take us to, and she goes and takes him like dates. So it's
Yeah.
just,
It
Alicia's
was
like, this place.
Nabal.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he like cut the beards off and like cut their
yeah,
pants off or
yeah.
something like that.
And she's like, no, you can't do this. So I'm
Yeah.
surprised she didn't go to the place for you and be like, hey, look, bro,
Yeah.
let me help you out.
Well, slap him upside the head.
Yeah.
So so kind of then back to what you're saying, the idea of when we were talking about history repeating itself. So the first point that I thought about was the idea of when we're looking for a king is to me I think somewhat what's the word I'm looking for, somewhat an easy one to go to, but looking for like a physical king in our lives. And so politics always just jumps to my mind, like as believers, even I think in our lives where we're looking for that redemption, that physical redemption here on this side of earth, and looking to a person or a political party to do that and be that in our lives. I think that's one way that we might look for a king in a way that God, in my mind, didn't necessarily uh, desire.
Yeah. Well, and you look at all the kings Israel had, there's only a few of them that were godly kings.
Yeah,
Most very worldly. You know, one of the reasons I love, I don't know, if I had it all to do over again, I probably would have named my son Josiah if I was a Christian back in the day. What a great king, right? To try to turn the
yeah,
people back to the Lord. But yeah, we have this concept that somebody in this party or that party, or, you know what, man, I love Tony Evans, I think it was, said, we're worried about posting the 10 Commandments in the walls of public places when we don't even talk about the 10 Commandments inside our own home.
yeah,
And, so
yeah,
I just, everybody's running around trying to, and I get it. There's economics and other things involved, and policy does drive some things. But
yeah, yeah,
man, there's no political party or political person that's going to bring us back to where we need to be. We need to turn back to God and let Him to be King of
yeah,
our lives, and then King of our families, which will ultimately become King of our churches, which will ultimately become King of our communities, and on you go. But the other
yeah.
one that comes to mind, though, I'm surprised you didn't bring up is money, man. Money's such a
Well,
king for people.
yeah,
How many people say, "Man, if I only had," it's funny. I think the other day I heard somebody say they interviewed some folks and took a survey, and they asked a person that makes $50,000 a year, how much more would you have to make next year for you to be comfortable? And they basically said $20,000. It's like, man, if I made 70 a year, I'd be really comfortable. Then they asked a person that made $100,000 a year, how much? And he said about 20,000. If I made 120, I'd be comfortable. Isn't that interesting? Person making 50, man, if I just had 20 more, I'd be comfortable. Person making 100, if I had 20 more, I'd be comfortable. And we all know that, man. Well, I don't know, maybe, but for me, it seems like the more I have, the more I got to manage, and the more
yeah,
difficult it is. And there's a large. Now maybe it comes with age. I'm looking for simplicity, man. I'm looking to get rid of all the things that got to be maintained, got to be kept up, and all this stuff. And I don't know. And just so many people think that if they had that extra dollar, all their problems would go away, and
yeah,
it's true. Yeah.
yeah. So money was definitely on my list of things to talk about. You just jumped ahead on my notes. That's
Uh,
all. You're a step ahead of me.
no.
Um, so yeah, so physical king, from a political standpoint. And then the second point I had was like looking for something as a king. So money was definitely one of them. I think that's a big one in our lives, and I know that's something even for me as I'm kind of winding down, the first career and start to look forward into the future over the next couple years. What is it? I feel like, maybe one that I want to do, and then more importantly, what do I feel like God is calling me or asking me to do? And the money is always something that, yeah, I mean, it's kind of maybe it shouldn't be, but in my mind it's always something that's there. I mean, I guess it's just a pragmatic aspect of life, like you gotta have money to a degree, right, to function. But but there's a lot of things that I could do in the second career. Um, some of them could be a fulfilling job, doing certain work that would make a lot of money, or in my mind, a lot of money. And then another on the other end of the spectrum could be something that's fulfilling in a different way and probably more along the lines of ministry. I've thought about Fellowship of Christian Athletes, or even just, ministry. A guy that I did an interview with recently, Rich Tuttle and Nudge Ministries, just that idea of, investing in a local, regional, global community, um, where you're not going to make as much. And so obviously for me, it's just praying through and being sensitive to the leading of the Spirit, in that, like, you really got, for me, is like, got to take money out of the equation and say, what is it that I'm supposed to do? Not just what do I want to do, but God, like, what is it that you are kind of laying before me, that we're supposed to pursue? So that's just something I'm praying through right now and have a little bit of time. But yeah, money being one, because we have to be very cognizant and careful that we don't make that king in our lives.
Yes, and I wonder, I don't know the statistics on all this, but I wonder how many people that set out to make their millions actually make their millions versus how many people set out to be diligent or just do their work and they become millionaires. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I think of a
Hmm.
story. There's a building in Atlanta. I don't know the name of the building, but it's a really tall building. And at the top of it, they built this structure back years and years ago, long before cell phones. Okay. So they built this structure and they built it in such a way that the wind could move through it so it didn't topple the building over. It was the tallest building in the Southeast at one time, I heard. But, anyways, today I was told, I don't know if this is true, I was told that they rent it out for $1 million a year because they put cell phone towers inside of, or antennas inside of it. They had no idea when they constructed this building that they could potentially make these millions off of
Hmm.
a place to put an antenna that didn't even exist back then. So I say that to say this: I think God has, when you're faithful and you walk with the Lord and you make Him King, I think there are people in the kingdom family that God's going to bless with resources so that they can finance
Yeah.
the other ministries where people are faithfully committed to use their talents but don't have the money.
Yeah.
I think right now my son-in-law, he runs a recovery home, halfway house. It's called Redeemed Living, right? And they're expanding. And man, he's got a great plan, a great vision. He has no earthly idea where he's going to come up with the money that he
Yeah.
needs. You know what I mean? Like literally every 3 months they have to make a payment. And right now, like they have no idea where it's coming from. But he's trusting God's called him to this ministry, and
Hmm.
God's going to find a person that he's blessed with financial gifting to help support that. And that's what he's trusting. He said, if this is of God, then God's going to provide for
Yep.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think as we kind of talk through some of these, that's just a really good nuanced point to make, where it's like, it's not that money is wrong. Paul talks about the love of money is the root of all evil. And so all of these things can be a good thing if they're kept in their right place. And that's, I think, the theme that we're going to come back to today, is just like ultimately keeping Jesus Christ as the king of your life, and letting these other components, they're obviously part of your day-to-day routine, your day-to-day life, but we can't put them on the throne.
Yes,
Um,
it's interesting. This morning during my reading, I'm in I think it's Acts 4, where Ananias and Sapphira, right? They sell their some guy sold
yeah,
some property, brought all the money to, and they gathered all the possessions together, and of course they like, hey, well, man, they really love that dude. Let's do that. Let's do
yeah,
that. A name for ourselves, and but they held back some of the money, right? And lied to the Holy Spirit, and boom,
hmm,
cast down dead right there. But so right there, I mean, it wasn't the money, it was the
hmm,
motive.
yeah, in the heart. Yep.
Yep, it's the motive, man. And that's what I try to tell people all the time. I love to get into this conversation in Romans 14, where Paul talks about doubtful things. And I always say, hey, what's the real motive? Sin is really about motive. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily about the topic always, but yeah, not to get off track, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yep. So another one that I thought about, the idea of discipline. in your lives, and how we can make that a king in our lives. And so I think both of us would just what's the word, vehemently, adamantly agree with each other that like the idea of discipline is really important. And I know that's really a kind of probably one of the foundational components of our friendship many years ago when we first met, is just talking through discipline. And when we were deployed to Qatar together, we go on long runs in the evening or in the early morning together, and just really loving that discipline component of our friendship. But at the same time, I think we have to be careful that we aren't making the idea of discipline and being disciplined king in our lives. And so one of the phrases that I think most people would recognize or be able to relate to or have heard is the idea of discipline equals freedom. Right. And that's a famous Navy SEAL guy. And there's, again, that statement in and of itself, I don't think is wrong. I think there's a lot of great things, and I understand the message that he's relaying. But when I hear that, to me, and I don't know, maybe this is just like too Christianese, but I think like discipline doesn't equal true freedom. Like Jesus Christ in relationship with Christ equals true freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And then to me, discipline is a component of your faith, discipline to get in the word, discipline in prayer, discipline in fellowship, discipline in a physical component. All of that is good. I think given that you keep Christ in his place in your life as king.
Yeah, so immediately a quote comes to mind. I don't know if this is a quote or something I made up. Or I read so much stuff and have been through so much in my life. I'm like, is that for me or somebody else? I promise it's for somebody. But anyways, persistence taken too far is stubbornness. Persistence taken too far is stubbornness. And here's what I mean by that. I used to have written on my board over here, Lord, don't let me focus on my agenda, but your will today.
That's
Because
good.
as a disciplined person, you and I are very,
Mm-hmm.
I think the night before, okay, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I don't know what it is, man. I am constantly like, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? Like, I'm going to do this and this and this. And I just always have to have something to do, something. And my wife's like, man, why you always got to have something to do? Why can't you just relax? I'm like, I don't know. Having something to
Mm-hmm.
do is relaxing to me or something.
Yeah.
But I'll get so disciplined about it that sometimes I know, looking back, God was calling me this over here to minister to this person or to,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I
Nope.
got to stay on track, God. I mean, I'm doing this for you, Lord.
Yeah.
Discipline. And what I planned today was planned to honor you, and I'm going to be
Yeah.
disciplined to do it. And he's like, bro, I'm calling you over here.
Mm-hmm.
And think about Jesus, who was headed to, and I get some of the stuff confused, so forgive me, but he's headed to Jerusalem, I think, and the most direct route was a shorter route, but he says, nah. And I have to think, okay, they probably planned the day before. Okay, tomorrow we're going to get up, we're going to go, we're going to walk this way, we're going to get there early, we're going to get, we're going to get this stuff done we got to get done.
Yeah.
And Jesus wakes up and he starts walking and he says, hey guys, we're going to go this way. And they're like, what? It don't make no sense, bro. This is the way we can get there quickly. Why we got
Mm-hmm.
to wear it? And we know that he went to Samaria to meet a woman at the well to impact her life so that she could be a huge witness for Christ in that
Yeah.
region, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they stayed disciplined to their task and they were like, oh, here we go, this is what we got to do, and all of us are the same. Get up there, get up in the morning. I go to the gym, and I'm like getting this workout in, and I'm all about time efficiency in the gym. I'm like, you got
Mm-hmm.
45 minutes, no more. That's all you're going to be in the gym, bro. That's
Yeah.
it. Stay focused. Some dudes over there like, hey, man, don't you pastorize? Yeah, man, I do. But hold on, I set right here. Like, don't interrupt, man.
Yeah.
Nah. And
It,
dude, I struggle with it. I struggle with it bad because is that a distraction
yeah.
from what God's calling me to do? Or is that what God's calling me to do?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think part of that is just trying to be sensitive to the leading of the Lord. And yeah, like finding it's always a balance, it's just like constant struggle. And because I'm the same way. I don't remember the specific incident, but just recently I remember thinking like, gosh, man, like I probably should stop and talk to this person and I'm just like, nah, man, got to go, I got things to do. I ain't got time for this. And it's just, but then I remember thinking like, ah, man, that's not the right heart, like, what's it hurt to stop, and worst case that you have a quick conversation and you continue on your way, or best case, man, you have a conversation and you're able to help someone, or they're able to help you. um
And it's a
I
constant
would.
struggle. I think I was telling you the other day, I was like, man, I want to spend some time with my nephew. He needs
Yeah.
somebody to invest in his life. So he loves to fish. I like to fish, right? So I get to do something I enjoy doing and get to invest in his life, right? And
Yeah.
so I said, hey, man, you want to go fish tomorrow? Yeah, I'd love to, man. I never get to go. So he gets all his stuff together. He's excited. And all of a sudden I hear about a guy in the church. His mother passed away and the funeral's tomorrow. And I'm like, man, I should probably go to this funeral and encourage this guy, be there. And I'm like, Lord, did you call me to invest in his life, or did you call me to be there and encourage him in this? And
Hmm.
oh, what am I doing? And am I doing the wrong thing? It's crazy, man. And it goes back to what you said, just trying your best to live sensitive to the calling of the Holy Spirit and be true. Know your heart and be honest about your heart in the midst of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, just I think it was earlier this week, or last week, just a couple days ago. So I went up to the high school because I was off, and I went up and they were having wrestling practice. And so I tried to get up there over Christmas and work out with the guys. So I show up, 8 a.m., 8 a.m. start. So I got up early to go through my morning routine before. And I show up, man, I walk in and I look around. I'm like, dude, there's like five kids here, five high school kids at practice. And like, I think we have more volunteers or coaches than kids. And so I'm there and I'm working out with a couple of them, and in my mind, part of me was just like, yeah, and I hate to say this, but part of me was like, what a waste, like, I don't know where half the team was. And the coach was kind of pissed because kids, were whatever, sick, or, family in town, whatever their reason was. I just think about, for me in high school in our program, it was like, especially for varsity, the expectation was you're there. Like, there was no, hey, I got family. It's like, bro, it's 8 a.m. December 27th. Like, you don't have an excuse, family, whatever. So you're there. But anyway, so that kind of was where my mind went. I'm like, hey, man, like, I'm here, and I appreciate the fact that there was a couple of kids that did show up. So we worked out. It was good practice. So that was encouraging. But then after, there was a kid that was there that graduated about 5 years ago, and man, he shared some of his experience with the few kids that were there. And then when he was done, me and him talked for a little while. We kept talking, and come to find out, just a really neat kid, and he's somewhat new in his faith. Made kind of a commitment, he said, about 18 months ago, to really get serious about his faith. And then we just talked about all kinds of stuff, and he's about to head to a mission trip to Belize, I think he said it was, for 3 months. And I think we talked for an hour. Really encouraging. I was encouraged, he was encouraged. And it's just like, that's maybe an example of, what, it's not about just showing up and being there to help out all the 30 kids that should have been there. It's like, you're investing in the ones that want to be there, and then through that, God kind of had this really cool connection, that we got to have an mutually encouraging conversation, and that was time well spent.
Yeah. I always think about like Sunday school, and like when I pastored a little church in Elam Baptist Church in Quitman, Georgia. You think about a Sunday school, they prep all week. Like, okay, man, I got to get ready, and they get there and there's like four people show up. Dude, I did all this, but check this out. I always tell the story, and always, I don't know if it's good or bad, but you never know if one of those four was Billy Graham, man.
Yeah.
Always thinking about Billy Graham's Sunday school teacher. I don't know why, but probably because it's just such an encouragement. You have no idea the impact you're going to have on one of those five boys.
Yeah.
The fact that you were faithful and you came, and they were important enough for you to be there. speaks volumes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's kinda I know the last time we talked, just that idea, are you driven or are you faithful?
Mm,
I think the idea of being driven, I think that's what can lead us down a path, in the pursuit of money, in the pursuit of discipline, in the pursuit of our training or our diet or our job or whatever it may be. I think that driven mentality can be a slippery slope, where you start to put these things as king over your life instead of focusing and prioritizing that relationship with Christ and leading of the Holy Spirit.
so it's interesting. Late last night, I'm getting ready to put together this speech, and I don't know what it's going to be about. But anyways, I was toying, and this might be a little shock to you because you've heard me talk about balance for so long. You know, all of our friendship, you've heard me talk balance, social,
Yeah.
emotional, spiritual, physical aspects of life. And last night I just started toying with this idea, and this is raw, so y'all give me grace because I'm not sure I'm where I'm at yet. But and I said, balance is a bad word. I don't like that word anymore because I looked it up and it says giving equal merit to things, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, eh, I never in my life give equal merit at that moment to anything, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to find a word that best describes what I think is right, and that is giving appropriate value to those pillars or those things in my life that are important at that moment without neglecting or abandoning the other. And the word I've been toying with is preeminence. Preeminence. And for example, it's like
Can you spell that for
I,
me, please?
actually PREEMINEC. I can't spell. Look, you did me
That
wrong.
Georgia education.
You did me wrong because you know I can't spell. I'm not even sure I said it right.
Preeminence.
Preeminent, yeah. But anyways, it's to give just value or appropriate value. I think at the moment, or give it additional value at the moment. So my whole thing is this: that, and I'm always about physical and spiritual. I love to use those two because
Yeah.
I think it's First Timothy 4:8, might be Second Timothy 4:8. I get confused about the first or second, but it says physical fitness is of some value, but spiritual fitness is of lasting and eternal value, right?
Hmm.
So as I walk, my role as husband sometimes takes preeminence over my role as pastor.
Hmm.
My physical fitness sometimes takes preeminence over my spiritual fitness, but more likely is my spiritual fitness is taking preeminence over my physical fitness. But I don't abandon or neglect the other.
Yeah.
Like in for the military guys, at some point in your life, your military service, you get ready to deploy, it takes preeminence over
Preeminence.
family,
Yep.
right? Because you got to be there and be ready to deploy to give you the best chance to make it home.
Hmm.
And then when you get home, your family needs to probably take preeminence over your military service. So I don't know. I think I'm changing my whole vernacular as I communicate this thing, and the word is now I think becoming preeminence. Um,
Okay.
but anyways, there you have.
Yeah. Now, I like that, and something maybe we can continue to talk about after this, because you know that's actually something that's been on my heart as well. And so it's always funny when we have conversations like for this topic specifically. I'm like, hey man, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And you're like, dude, I just preached on that concept. And so I watched your message. It's like, yeah, I think we're very much aligned. But yeah, I've been thinking about the same thing of because maybe it's because of our military background, and I've obviously listened to you speak from a military standpoint. But the pillars, the emotional, physical, spiritual. Of course, now I'm blanking. Mental, these different pillars and different ways to articulate that. But I've kind of been thinking about part of that is more of a journey than like a structure. And again, some of this is all just nuanced, whatever,
Yeah.
the way that we want to articulate it. But But the idea of, and that's why I really like your concept with preeminence, where it's like along this journey of life, there are going to be times when, your mental component is very strong, but maybe your physical isn't, or your physical is, but your spiritual isn't, or even, what I've talked about in the past as well is you might be still doing all of those things, but and that's where I was about 4 years ago, like still very disciplined getting in the word, still very disciplined from a physical standpoint, but man, I was struggling with a lot of pride, and
Mm.
allowing, this bitterness and anger kind of deep within me to just simmer and kind of just, I mean, it's not funny, but it exploded,
Mm.
in ways that I just was like, man, like, and so I'm still doing all of these things, but I'm maintaining those disciplines. And so the structure was maybe good, but there's a lot of underlying things that weren't necessarily healthy or good. So yeah, I like that idea of preeminence, and looking at it as a constantly evolving kind of having to prioritize based on just the realities of life, I think.
Yeah, I think about, like you just said, simmer. So I was just thinking to myself, sometimes I got all these things. I got my core stuff,
Hmm.
and all of them are on simmer. But every once in a while, I kick one up to boil,
Yeah.
right? So, and hopefully, I do that by the prompting of the Holy Spirit. I mean, my all of them are sitting on the foundation of Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
Well, that's good, man. So I think that we've kind of covered, just a couple examples of the ones that at least I know I wanted to talk to, and I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but
Yeah, I do
um,
have one. I thought you might
okay.
touch on this, and man, we like dabble and we put our toe in it. The other king sometimes that we put in our life above our relationship with Christ, above Christ, is people,
Mm,
right? And man, this is a touchy one because your spouse,
yeah,
your
family.
how you idolize different people, and what they mean to you in your life. But sometimes, well, and I use the example, some people think if I can only find Mr. Right, or if I can only find that one girl, my life will be complete. Man,
Yeah.
think the burden that puts on that person, right? And listen, I'm speaking. If there was ever one thing that really led to a lot of my just waywardness early in my life, and problems in my marriage, and believe it or not, was the fact that I wanted to be everything to Lynn and I wanted her to be everything to me. And we both know that's impossible,
Yeah.
right? It's absolutely impossible. And I would get so jealous. Like, dude, I remember, like, if she said, "Man, that guy's so funny," I'm like, I'll whoop that dude. He cannot be funnier than me. I have to be the funniest dude you know. And then she's like, "Man, that dude's tall." No, I have to be the tallest person. I mean, I was so insecure, so jealous, man. And so, I mean, and I'm just being honest with you. And, I tell her this stuff today. She's like, "What?" She said, "That's ridiculous." And, but like anybody that was anything more than me, man, I want to take them down. And then I would just insist on trying to be that. And then the problem is I put that burden on her too.
Mm,
And unfortunately, we do that with friendships. We do that with relatives. We do that with intimate relationships. Man, it just cannot happen. If you want to destroy a relationship, you put that kind of preeminence on that relationship and you put it above your relationship with Christ,
yeah.
boom, you just cause some serious problems in your life.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I like that one. People. Yeah, marriage, family, and that's, family is one, for me. I would say, man, that was probably about a year and a half ago, maybe about a year ago. So I've kind of been, just walking along the journey with the military career, and just trying to be, intentional about praying, what's that next step for us? What are we supposed to do? I really want to stay here, uh, but ultimately being willing and submitted to go wherever I felt like it was that God was calling us to go. And so I was just reading through some old journals recently, and that is, I think it's about a year ago where I was at a point where I was having to make some decisions, and I just remember my heart being like, all right, I really got to be willing to set what I want and what I think is best for me and for my family. I've got to be willing to set that aside to seek the Lord, and so that's not easy. So basically in my mind I'm like, okay, like if God is like, nope, you're continuing on the path of the military and potentially promotion and or deployments and or more moves, like that's not easy, and I've kind of come to a point where it's like, man, like we like where we're at, like my job, don't necessarily want to move, I'm not necessarily interested in promoting, um, but really kind of had to check myself on that. And yeah, so I think a big one was taking family off the altar and not saying like I know what's best for my kids and my family, and that's staying here,
Mm.
and having to seek the Lord to say, all right, like, and I remember praying this, it's like, God, all right, everything is on the table, whatever it is, like everything is on the table, however, comma, if if you're asking for my input, I would like to stay, and I think it's been healthy for me and our family and our marriage. Like that's what I desire, but ultimately, really just being submitted to what God had planned. But yeah, I
And
think it can be easy.
that's a perfect example of what Jesus prayed in the garden. Lord,
Yeah,
if there's any way, do this other way. Take this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done. Perfect
yeah,
example of Christ.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. But I think keeping that people, that family, those relationships in balance is important.
Yeah. I think about, check this out, as you're saying that, I think about Abraham, right?
Yeah,
So Abraham's got Isaac. They finally had a kid. Nowhere in the scripture do we see where he went and consulted Sarah. Hey, babe,
yeah,
I think the Lord's telling me to go up there and kill this kid. What do you think?
yeah,
Why? Because we know it. I mean, I shouldn't say I know, but I'm pretty sure
yeah.
Sarah would be like, hey, tonight I'm taking your daddy down. You ain't getting my boy. That huge paraphrase, reading into a lot of stuff, but I don't know, and that's
Yeah,
difficult to communicate because, man, and even more difficult for our wives, right? Because I mean, like I can't imagine like if God would say, Rick, get up, I want you to move to I don't know where, and I go to Lynn and be like, hey, look, God's telling me. She'd be like, look, bro, you better be for sure. And it would take
yeah.
a lot of faith on her part to get. And now, you know what's funny? Let's go all the way back to the story we started with. Now let's take this reverse roles. Mary, God comes to Mary and says, "Hey, you're going to
Mm,
conceive my son." Who has to submit and support? Joseph.
Joseph.
But it says you got to submit and support Mary, right? Because I'm
Yeah,
about to use her in a mighty way. Wow. Yeah. Big deal.
yeah. Well, awesome. I think this has been encouraging and helpful for me in conversation. So if I were to just summarize here, just the idea of, are we looking for a king in our lives? And I think the answer is yes. I think that's a natural human tendency to look for that external factor, internal factor in our lives, whether it be from a political standpoint, whether it be from a personal standpoint, looking to yourself in the discipline component or your job or money or people. Um, None of those, I think, in and of themselves are inherently wrong. But what I think Rick and I are just trying to convey, and hopefully we did a good job of this, is um, putting and keeping Christ as king in your life,
Mhm.
and allowing decisions and actions to flow from that. And I believe when we do that, when we keep Christ as king in our lives, that's going to allow us to really follow that path, that perfect plan that God has for us, and gives us an opportunity to partner with Him and allow Christ to move through us and in us to accomplish his purpose. Rick, you got any closing thoughts there?
No, man, I think you just aced it. Your statement right there at the end is it, man. Is that relationship with Christ, making him king of our lives, is not in competition with any of that stuff. It is what makes all of those things better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today. Be blessed, endure. And I just pray that whatever God's putting on your heart, that you're willing and you take action to that next step. Take care, and we'll talk soon.